Hello, beautiful watchers, and welcome to Lost in Adaptation, the show that answers all the questions you probably didn't ask about your favourite film that was based on a book. In this episode, using words that don't really mean what I think they mean, we're going to be taking a good hard stare at The Princess Bride. The kind of stare that would make someone break eye contact and move to the other side of the bus. The author, William Goldman, used a slightly unusual method for writing the book, namely he denies writing it altogether, instead giving credit to fictional author S. Morgenstern, and claiming to only be abridging it to reflect the manner that his father read it to him as a child. Goldman's commitment to this ruse is absolute. Entire pages of the book are given over to his comments on Morgenstern's bizarre way of writing, and the entire first chapter of the book takes the form of a fictional biography about how he ended up adapting the original Princess Bride. To make matters more confusing, Goldman mixes in things that genuinely did happen in his life with the made-up stuff, so it's easy to lose track of where the reality ends and the fiction begins. So I guess this means that the boy in the movie, simply credited as grandson, is in fact Goldman, who, as I mentioned, is a real person and the author of the story. But the story you're seeing about him being told the story is just a story that he made up as a way of telling the story. So to summarise, this film is an adaptation of a book which itself claims to be an adaptation but isn't. Glad we sorted that out.
The film is very loyal to the main fantasy story. Goldman is not only a talented author, but apparently a gifted screenwriter as well. There was the usual amount of swapping of lines between characters and a few inevitable substitutions that always crop up in pre-CGI movies. However, the entire plot and the best bits of the dialogue survived the adaptation process pretty much unscathed. The love story at the beginning, the kidnapping, the chase, the inconceivable rescue, the fire swamp, the ambush, the life-sucking machine, the quest to revenge, the miracle, the pyromaniac assault, the duel, the bluff, and the escape out the window are all lifted straight out of the book. Fans of the movie will be pleased to hear that such gems as
you wish.
Inconceivable!
You keep using the word. I don't think it means what you think it means.
Hello! My name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die!
are all in the book, although I will say the tone of their delivery is sometimes altered slightly. Wesley and the Count are pretty much identical to their book origins, and Nego and Fezzik's personalities are spot on, even if they're physically a little different. Jokes like the senile old king and the bishop with the speech impediment, who also in the book, along with hilarious stuff like people having a polite conversation while locked in Mortal Kombat. This film is so loyal to the book, this is actually going to be quite a short segment, as I would otherwise have to describe pretty much everything in the film.
Hello, my name is Inigo Montoya. You changed my movie slightly. Now, prepare to die.
The kissophobic kid in the movie would be pleased to hear that they toned down the romantic dialogue quite a bit. There's entire paragraphs in the book of Buttercup explaining how the love she felt for Wesley half an hour ago was stronger than any love a woman had ever felt for a man, but it was nothing compared to the love she feels for him now. Wesley later responded that if her love was a grain of sand, his would fill a universe full of beaches.
Hang on a second. Soppy love declarations? Clumsy metaphors involving sand?
So, yeah, as you wish being code for I love you certainly wasn't the only thing these two were getting up to, but it was by far the least cringe-worthy. In the book, Inigo's scars are much more prominent and run all the way down both sides of his face. Also, Fezzik is meant to be Turkish as opposed to French, but I don't actually give much of a fuck about that because Andre the motherfucking Giant, y'all! Vicini is, to be completely honest, a little bit of a disappointment. Don't get me wrong, Wallace Shawn's performance was great and those lines are crazy memorable. It's just that in the book, Vicini was so good at reading people that he appeared to be downright clairvoyant at times, so you really got the impression he was getting the better of Wesley in the game of wits, instead of him just sprouting random facts at the top of his lungs that really didn't hold that much relevance when you actually thought about them. Buttercup was improved slightly in the film. If you found yourself thinking that she was a little bit stupid, a bit unhelpful, and was probably only being fought over because of her stunning good looks, times that by 10 and you have the book version of her. The prince is the right level of evil in the film, but the man described in the book was much beefier. This is meant to be a guy who regularly did things like wrestle orangutans. More on that later. In the book, when Buttercup took her impromptu swim, she was almost eaten by sharks rather than eels. Give it up now. Yes, quite. The machine the Count uses to suck away Wesley's life is in the book, almost as described here. However, there are way more glass cups involved. Every inch of his body, including up his nose and under his eyelids, had its own cup attached. It's not specifically said, but you have to wonder if... you know. Well, this is awkward. Wesley actually followed through with that strike in the book. You know the part where they use Buttercup's first nightmare to trick you into thinking that Buttercup had actually married the prince? Well, in the book, the asshole reading the story takes a break there, and the devastated kid is left thinking that the bad guy had won for an entire day. This isn't the last time he does something like this either. He lets the poor little invested fucker think that Wesley was actually dead for goodness knows how long. The book shouldn't be called The Princess Bride, it should be called Sadistic Old Man Messes with Sick Child's Emotions. The divining rod sword scene is probably the only thing the film added that straight up just didn't happen in the book.
Fool! You fell victim to one of the classic blunders! The most famous is never get involved in a land war in Asia, but only slightly less well known is this: never omit things from your film while the dom is watching!
So all of Goldman's stories about how the book influenced his life are whittled down to just the important one: his father reading him the book when he was sick. It's understandable, as I can't for the life of me think of a way they could have cohesively adapted that into the story. Nevertheless, because of this, we miss out on learning about how he goes from being a sports-obsessed underachiever to a fantasy novel enthusiast and amateur writer, going on later in life to become an award-winning novelist and screenplay writer. He gets too distracted to have a marriage-ending affair and almost gets fired from his screenplay writing job, all because of this book. Oh, and yes, you did hear me say father, not grandfather. I genuinely don't know if fathers being unnecessarily axed off is going to become a running theme here, but let's start a counter just in case. There's also the before-mentioned pages where Goldman describes the part of Morgenstern's book that he supposedly cut out, like the long and boring history of Florence, the chapter about the Queen packing and unpacking her luggage, and the 72 pages of Buttercup's etiquette training. There were also some large parts of the main story that didn't get left out of the book, wink wink, but were left out of the film. Like, for example, before the prince met Buttercup, he was considering marriage to a Gilda princess, but that fell through when he found out that she was bald for some reason. Small things like Fezzik's Holocaust cloak and the white horses he found have a surprising amount of backstory in the book. They also mention that Wesley's resurrection would allow him basic movement for about half an hour, then he would probably relapse into either long-term paralysis for anything up to a year, or possibly permanent death. Inigo's history of losing his father and seeking revenge, verbally explained in the film, took the form of an extensive flashback in the book, and Fezzik's long, sad story of a giant man-child being forced into the life of a prize fighter against his will didn't get so much as a mention. The book took the time to make a very, very big deal out of Buttercup being the single most beautiful woman in the world. This is one of those things that's easy enough to write, but impossible to show, as no matter who you cast, they're not going to appeal to everybody. Buttercup's guilt-induced nightmare was the first of many described in the book, and oh boy do they get progressively darker as they go on. Like talking baby dying in her arms and crumbling to dust level dark. Probably due to the lack of feasibility, they had to leave out things like Wesley's pirate ship Revenge being driven off by a fleet of Florence warships as it came to pick him up. Another notable absence is the Zoo of Death. The secret dungeon Wesley is moved to in the film is just the bottom level of a massive underground complex that the prince has, over the years, filled with the most exotic and dangerous animals in the world for the expressed purpose of regularly going down there and fighting them. When Inigo and Fezzik go down there to retrieve Wesley, they end up having to fight their way through a series of terrifying encounters before they finally reach his body. Oh boy, you are gonna hate me for this. There's a distinct possibility that they all died at the end. I'm not kidding. After they jump out the window and start to ride off, the prince slips his bonds and mobilizes his army to ride around and try and cut them off. At this exact moment, Wesley relapses back into full paralysis, Inigo's guts stop falling out of his stomach wound, Fezzik is left to lead them and gets everyone hopelessly lost, and Buttercup? Well, Buttercup was pretty much useless all the way through the story, and that doesn't change now. It's left open-ended if they got away or died horribly at the hands of the prince. Goldman offers his opinion that they probably got away, but then goes on to add that he suspects that there still wouldn't be a happily ever after ending, because the minute that Buttercup's looks start to go, Wesley would finally realise that she was an idiotic, self-obsessed sycophant, and probably not worth spending the rest of his life on the run from the Florence Armada for.
The Dom's final thoughts. You know, if it was up to me, it would be required by law that if the author of the book is still alive, he helps write the screenplay, even if he doesn't want to. At this point, you've probably picked up on the fact that I'm a big fan of the book and the film, which is a little odd under the circumstances because what I loved most about the book wasn't the story at all, but Goldman's unique style of writing, something that cannot be translated into visual imagery. This could very well have made for a very disinteresting film, but the action scenes were so gloriously hokey, the performances were so fittingly over the top, and the dry wit was so perfectly delivered that the film ended up being just as good in its own right. So yeah, good book, good film, good adaptation, goodbye beautiful watchers.